It was almost real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast, episode 90. Hello and welcome to this episode of It Was Almost Real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast. My name is Ken Zimmerman Jr., and this is the podcast dedicated to the history of professional wrestling between 1870 and 1930. And in this episode, I will talk about who I believe is the first father-son wrestlers in American professional wrestling history, and that's Bob Managoff and Bobby Managoff Jr. But first, I wanted to wish all the fathers listening to the podcast out there happy Father's Day. I'm actually recording this on Father's Day. I thought that a good topic for the podcast would be who I believe are the first father and son wrestlers in American professional wrestling history. I'm 70% sure of that fact, which is why I don't state it with so much emphasis, because I could be missing somebody, but when I thought about it today, that's who I came up with. There were lots of brother combinations that wrestled professionally in the 19th century. William Muldoon's brother wrestled. Joe Acton's brother wrestled. Tom Connor's brother was a wrestler for a very short time. He was primarily a boxer. Plenty of brothers. And of course, the famous brothers in the very early 20th century is Stanislaus Zbyszko and his younger brother Wladek Zbyszko. But as far as fathers and sons, I think Bob Managoff, they called him senior, but he wasn't senior until Bobby Managoff Jr. made his debut in 1936. I'll get into that topic in just a few minutes. I'm going to have a couple of recommendations and a review more of kind of an angle history in the AWA in 1984. Update wise, the new book on the Divided Championship should be out next weekend. I'm thinking June 22nd will be the day it gets released, but it will be out before the end of the month. And as I said earlier, my next project is going to be a second edition of the St. Louis Civil War. So the next combat sports history book will probably come out in early 2026. And right now that will be a biographical sketch of 10 professional wrestlers from the 19th century who were important and who had notable careers, but there's not enough information on them to make a good book, but there's enough information on several of them put together to make a decent book. So that'll be the next combat sports history project. This week, I wanted to talk about Robert Magunian, who wrestling fans would know as either Bob Managoff Sr. or Bob Turtle Fredericks. I learned something new this week when I was researching this podcast, and that is somebody that I had researched previously in Origins of a Legend, The Making of Ed Strangler Lewis. Bob Turtle Fredericks was a significant wrestler in that book in 1913 because he was in Louisville Lexington, because that was the circuit that Ed Strangler Lewis came to in 1913 and really built his national reputation and became Ed Strangler Lewis. And I actually thought that Bob Turtle Fredericks being there before Robert Friedrich got there was the impetus for the promoters to get him to change his name, and he took Ed Strangler Lewis in homage to the famous Wisconsin wrestler Evan Strangler Lewis. So I knew that Fredericks was a significant part of that book. I never had made the connection that he was Bob Managoff Sr., and then when I looked at the picture, it was pretty obvious. Oh, yeah, these are the same person. So I have a little bit of experience researching Bob Managoff, and he wasn't known as Bob Managoff Sr. until Bobby Managoff Jr., his son, made his professional debut in 1936, and Bob Managoff Sr. was his manager. Robert M. Manugian, or that's probably Manusian, was born in Armenia on April 15th, 1883. And he started wrestling around 1906 at about 23 years old in the United States. I'm not quite sure when he immigrated to the United States, but I do believe he immigrated with his parents when he was a child, so he didn't come to the United States necessarily to wrestle. Pro wrestling at the time he made his debut was transitioning to mostly worked matches, and all of the matches that I have researched on Bob Managoff Sr. were worked matches. One of the first times Bob Managoff Sr. becomes a significant wrestler where people start reading about him in the newspapers is in a handicap match in Anderson, Indiana in 1909. So when we say handicap match, we're not using that as an insulting term for a person with disabilities. This is a term in wrestling for a match where there's special stipulations to try to make the match more even between the competitors. These were used in legitimate contests, although the one I'm going to talk about right now is not a legitimate contest. But these stipulations were used to try to make matches more even. So you might have Frank Gotch coming to town, and maybe Frank Gotch is going to wrestle the local wrestlers. There's no local wrestler in that town that can challenge Frank Gotch. But Gotch will say, okay, I'll take your two best wrestlers and I'll pin them 2 times each or 3 times each within 45 minutes or an hour. So they would call that a handicap match. If Gotch lost, he wasn't going to lose the championship, but that might give the wrestler that he wasn't able to throw in that time a chance at the championship later on down the line. Gotch lost almost none of those matches. But once wrestling converts into being a work sport, these handicap matches continue because even though it's worked, the way people are presented, they're presented at different levels. So you can't have the world champion come in and wrestle a couple of bums unless you do something to make it look more even. People are not going to come out to see two local guys that are part-timers wrestle the world champion unless you can give them a reason to think the two local guys stand any kind of chance at all against the champion. Otherwise, you're going to get the small group of people that want to just see the champion. In this match in 1909, I'm not sure if he was the promoter, but Jack Curley was the referee for this match in Anderson, Indiana. And Jack Curley was as crooked as a dog's hind leg. So if he was involved in this, there was some kind of shady business going on somewhere. Jack Curley, before he became the New York City wrestling promoter, was involved with the shenanigans around the Gotch Hackenschmidt second match. That match was a contest, but it should not have occurred because Hackenschmidt was so injured going into that match, but they were going to lose a fortune if he pulled out. So Curley managed to convince him to go on with the match, but Hackenschmidt said, okay, I'll only go on with the match if all betting is canceled. Curley agrees, and Curley announces that, yep, we've canceled all betting. All betting on this match is off. However, after making that announcement in the newspapers, he sent people out into the arena the day of the match to generate betting and was said to have pulled in about like $30,000 in winnings off of this match, off of that match between Hackenschmidt and Gotch. So my guess is this was a handicap match with Yusuf Mahmoud, who was one of the biggest national stars at the time. He was a challenger for Frank Gotch's world title. And Mahmoud came to Anderson, Indiana, and he wrestled two wrestlers, one of whom was Bob Managoff Sr., and if he couldn't beat both of them in 45 minutes, the other two would be considered the winner. Mahmoud beats the first wrestler in 14 minutes and 30 seconds. So now if he beats Bob Managoff Sr., he's going to win the match. However, Bob Managoff Sr. held him off for the next 31 minutes and 30 seconds and won the match for their team because Mahmoud was unable to throw Bob Managoff Sr. There was a lot of action in this match, which makes me lean towards a worked match. Jack Curley was involved in this, makes me lean towards a worked match. Since gambling was such a big part of these things, this was a shock development. Mahmoud was expected to beat both of them pretty handily. So there was probably a lot of gambling money that could have been won with a shock decision like that, with Managoff holding him off, which is, I suspect, what happened here. In 1913, he goes to the Louisville-Lexington circuit, which is promoted by Bob M. Walls, who is the Lexington promoter. William Barton is the Louisville promoter. And William Barton would kind of move all over. He would be a promoter in Birmingham, Alabama. He would be a promoter in Atlanta, Georgia. I think he became the long-time Atlanta promoter after John Contos. Barton and Walls had a promotion in 1913 in Lexington and Louisville, and it was one of the hotbeds for a couple of years, mainly because of the presence of Ed Strangler Lewis. But William Demetral wrestled there. Dr. Benjamin Roller wrestled there. Lots of big stars wrestled there. Managoff was there as Bob Turtle Fredericks. He won and lost while he was in Louisville. And generally, if he was in the main event, he lost. But if he was in the mid card, he usually won. And Frederick stayed in Louisville and Lexington for most of 1913. Bob Managoff Sr., though's most newsworthy incident did not occur in the professional wrestling ring. It occurred because of a training accident. So in 1913, Frank Gotch retires after defeating George Lurick in a world title match in Kansas City. So from April 1913 until 1915, there's no recognized world champion, and wrestling kind of starts going through a slow time. Seeing an opportunity, a European wrestling promoter named Sam Rockman comes to the United States in 1915 and holds the New York International Wrestling Tournament, one of the most famous tournaments in American professional wrestling, because that was also the first time we've found. I always hesitate to say this was the absolute first time, because you can find something earlier that, no, this is where they got that from. But the one that we know of for sure, the first time there was a mass wrestler in the United States was the Mass Marvel, and that was the gimmick that saved the fall version of the 1915 International Wrestling Tournament. There was a spring version and a fall version. Spring version was very well attended, but they had a disappointing, long, uneventful contest that went to a draw at the end of that tournament. And so when they had the title match in the fall, fans had already started to lose interest. The fall tournament was starting to be a disaster. And they saved it by introducing this mass wrestler in the crowd in early December, demanding to be able to wrestle, and saying he was being held out by the promoters. And there was all kinds of supposition about who that was. Some people even thought it was Joe Stecker, which was laughable. But while that's going on, because Rockman held this tournament for the express purpose of getting the American wrestling public to accept Alexander Aberg, Alex Aberg, as the world champion successor to Frank Gotch. Aberg had a claim on the World Greco-Roman Heavyweight Wrestling Championship. Even though he had lost to Stanislaus Zbyszko in 1914, everybody in the 1915 tournament lost to him. Both tournaments, actually, lost to him in Greco-Roman wrestling. A couple people held out for a draw, including Vladek Zbyszko in the final of the spring tournament, but nobody beat him. And even those that held out to a draw, he beat them in subsequent matches. So no one touched. So Aberg did have a claim to the World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship of Greco-Roman wrestling. At the same time that this is going on, and remember, this is Greco-Roman wrestling, the dominant style at that time in American professional wrestling, and had been since the 1890s and is to this day, is catch-as-catch-can wrestling, catch wrestling. That style is what Frank Gotch held the world title in. They still had the American Heavyweight Championship recognized. So in 1915, December 1915, A young wrestler by the name of Joe Stecker, who was widely considered the best wrestler in the United States, wrestled and defeated Charlie Cutler for the American Heavyweight Wrestling Championship. That match was a work, but if they had had a contest, Stecker would have won that too. So Stecker is the American Heavyweight Wrestling Champion, but the fans start recognizing him as the world champion and the successor to Frank Gotch. You've had these situations going on. Gotch has been retired since 1913. You have this tournament where Aberg has a claim on the Greco-Roman title, and Stecker has a claim on the American Heavyweight Wrestling Championship, which fans are starting to recognize as the world title. Gotch, since he has been retired, has been challenged multiple times by multiple wrestlers, including Alex Aberg, and he was getting tired of it. He just wanted to retire. He toured with the circus to make some money, but he was a very successful farmer in Humboldt, Iowa, and did not want to get in the ring anymore. His wife was not a big fan of him wrestling professionally. He was in his mid-30s, getting closer to 40. He had no desire to get back in the ring competitively. Well, Joe Stecker is on friendly terms with Martin Farmer Burns, Frank Gotch's old trainer, who also worked with the Stecker brothers a little bit. They're on friendly terms. Frank Gotch wants all these challengers to go away and leave him alone. So he and Martin Farmer Burns come up with the idea, hey, let's have a match with the kid. Frank will put him over. Then that'll get everybody to leave Frank alone, and Joe will be established as the undisputed World Heavyweight Champion because he beat the last undisputed World Heavyweight Champion. Joe and Tony Stecker like the idea. Frank Gotch loves the idea. Martin Farmer Burns is on board. So they need to start getting Frank into condition, at least publicly, so they can have this match in the fall of 1916. At the time this is all going on, Frank Gotch is touring with a circus, and one of the wrestlers on this tour with him is the person that he taps to be his training manager to prepare him for the match with Joe Stecker. And that person is Bob Managoff Sr. Bob Managoff Sr. and him are in Kenosha, Wisconsin, so they decide to do a workout for the local media, and they're going to show how good a condition Frank's in and that he's ready for this match with Joe Stecker. So they're out wrestling around. Gotch is looking really good. And while they're out there training, Gotch picks Managoff up for a hip throw and is getting ready to deliver it, but they had mats on the floor, and Gotch's foot went between two of the mats. So when we have our judo class, I have just now started letting my oldest son put the mats down. Normally that is something that only I will do, because if there is any gap in that mat, just the most smallest gap in those mats, your toes will find them, your fingers find them. It's a bad thing that happens when your foot, when you get a toe or something in those little crevices in a mat. Well, his foot went between two mats. When he went to do the throw, it threw him off, and he came down very awkwardly, and he actually broke his leg right above the ankle. So his fibia, he broke, and it splintered. The break was really bad. So the doctor said he's off training for at least 6 months. He can't do anything. And that pretty much put an end to any thought for the match between Stecker and Gotch. Gotch had to heal up. That put the end to his touring for 1916. In 1917, he started feeling ill, and he would die in December of 1917 at 40 years of age from uremic poisoning. Managoff is more famous for being the one that was working out with Gotch when Gotch broke his leg than anything that he really did in the ring. His son, Bobby Managoff Jr., Robert Magunian Jr., was born on January 4th, 1918 in Chicago, Illinois. So Bob Managoff was 34 years old when Bobby Managoff was born. Bobby Managoff makes his debut as a professional wrestler in 1836. 1836. Boy, those his dad's born in 1883. That would have been quite a feat. In 1936, at 18 years of age, Bobby Managoff Jr. makes his debut. And Bob Managoff Sr., who had been working primarily as a referee because he's in his early 50s at that time, becomes his manager. Bob Managoff Sr. is uh, around to see his son win the National Wrestling Association world title in 1942 at only 24 years of age. So in the 1940s, a lot of the wrestlers end up in the service just like around World War One. Wild Bill Longson, being an older guy, was one of the few that didn't get sent away. So he was the biggest star of the 1940s, particularly the war years. And he was the National Wrestling Association, not to be confused with the National Wrestling Alliance, although later on the National Wrestling Alliance would basically co-opt the National Wrestling Association title lineage and claim it as their own. But Wild Bill Longson needed credible people that he could work with and drop the title to every once in a while, because if he just held the title forever, people would get tired of it and quit coming to see the matches. So in 1942, he drops it to this 24-year-old kid, and Bobby Managoff holds it. Bobby Managoff Jr. holds it for almost a year before dropping it back in 1943. In 1944, Bob Managoff Sr. passes away at 61 years of age, so he did get to see his son as the world champion. Bobby Managoff Jr. would continue on with his wrestling career, and he was a popular wrestler. Well, popular wrestler. He was a nationally known wrestler in the 1950s. A lot of times he was a heel because he was a big burly guy and had more heelish look to him than a babyface, but he did occasionally work as a babyface. But he was a big star on the Chicago TV, particularly early on. The recommendation I have is for a Bobby Managoff Jr. match versus Angelo Poffo from Chicago. I think it's 52 or 54. But you got Bobby Managoff Jr., the son of a professional wrestler, going against Angelo Poffo, the father of two professional wrestlers, Macho Man Randy Savage and Leaping Lanny Poffo. So I thought that would be a good match, and it was a pretty entertaining match. Another recommendation I have that doesn't really have anything to do with professional wrestling, and you have to have Prime Video to watch it, but the third season of Jack Reacher came out a couple months ago, and I just finally had a chance to watch it a couple weeks ago. I liked it. I'd say out of the series, the first one is my favorite, followed probably by the third one and then by the second one. But I liked all three seasons, so you can't go wrong if you watch all three seasons. My review this week is going to be more about an angle that I saw, and I remember because we had AWA television when this angle came off in 1984. And I remember staying up watching it when I wasn't supposed to be. I had a TV in my room downstairs, so there was many a night that I would put a towel down by the door so if my mom came down, she couldn't see there was a light there, that she wouldn't know I was up late watching professional wrestling. And AWA came on at 11 o'clock on Saturday night. So I saw this angle live. Well, it wasn't live. The show was taped. I saw this angle when it aired on St. Louis television in the summer of 1984, because it's a two-part, really, angle. At least that's the way I look at it. And I was very familiar with King Kong Brody because he was a huge star in St. Louis. The very first wrestling match I ever attended, before I went with my sister Vicky every 3 weeks, starting in 1981, I went with her to see the matches every 3 weeks. The very first card I went to was for my birthday, And my natural father, Ken Sr., is the one that took me to it. And the main event that night was Andre the Giant and Dick the Bruiser versus King Kong Brody and Dick Murdoch. It's one of my it's one of my good memories with my natural father. I have a lot more good memories with my stepdad who raised us. When I say dad, that's usually who I'm talking about. I personally haven't celebrated Father's Day since Dad died. I tell people all the time, I had the greatest dad in the world. He just didn't bring me into it. But Ken Sr. took me to my first wrestling card I ever attended at Kiel Auditorium. And we always remembered it because at one point in that match, and I think Brody was holding on to Andre's hand to make him able to do this, but Andre the Giant reached over and grabbed Brody by the hair and picked him up, and Brody's feet were running in midair while Andre was holding him up, which is a tremendous feat of strength, but Brody had to be helping him too. I don't know how you would pick up a 200-something pound man like that without some assistance. So I was very familiar with Brody from being in St. Louis. And I knew I had been watching AWA for a couple months, so I knew who the High Flyers were. I did know that Vern Gagne owned that promotion, probably from a wrestling magazine. And I, like probably everybody else that watched it, was like, "Oh, they're pushing his Greg Gagne because that's his son." If you watch now, Greg Gagne actually was a very competent wrestler. He didn't have any kind of physique, and that would definitely be an issue starting in the mid '80s. But he was not a terrible wrestler. He was not George Goulas. He was not that in that level. He was a good, competent mid-card tag team wrestler. He didn't have a great physique. He didn't have a great look, but he was very competent in the ring. And as part of the High Flyer tag team with Jim Brunzell, he was fine. So the first time we're introduced to Bruiser Brody, King Kong Bruiser Brody, on AWA television is he comes out while Jim Brunzell, one half of the High Flyers, is wrestling Rooster Griffith. Could be Rooster Griffith. He was a regular enhancement talent in the AWA at the time. And Brunzell's having a 2 to 3 minute match with him. And I thought how they set this up was brilliant because Greg Gagne is at ringside for Jim Brunzell's match, which that part was a little unusual. It wasn't that off. I don't remember. Maybe I could be wrong. Somebody that watched AWA television all the time, because I got it in around the time this happened. We probably got it a few months before that. So we probably got AWA television in early 1984. I don't remember the baby faces coming out with their tag team partners when they were having single matches against enhancement talent very often. But Gagne was there. Brunzell gets the Rooster Griffith tied up in a figure four. So once Brunzell puts that hold on, he's kind of stuck there on the mat. Well, while Brunzell's getting ready to put that hold on, Sheik Adnan Al-Kaisi, the manager for, we don't know this at the time because it was a surprise, but who's going to be the manager for King Kong Bruiser Brody in AWA, comes out and gets into an argument with Greg Gagne, and they're pushing each other, and Gagne punches him. But you hear something going on in the ring, and they pan up to the ring, and it's King Kong Bruiser Brody just did that flying knee drop on Jim Brunzell, who can't move because he's got the guy stuck in the figure four. Lands right on his chest, takes him out. Gagne sees what's going on, hits Al-Kaisi again and jumps up on the apron, but Brody gets him, slugs him, picks him up, slams him in the ring, pulls him to the side while Adnan Al-Kaisi holds his leg, and does that flying knee drop to his knee. Beautiful injury angle pull off. It looked really good. And then Brody does another knee drop to Brunzell's chest, and he leaves, and they do a promo over. And with the announcer, and Wally Carbo says he's going to suspend Brody. But of course, the baby faces are going to demand that he not be suspended so that they can wrestle him. So the introduction of Bruiser Brody is pure chaos. After Brody and Al Casey cut the promo. They cut to longtime AWA standout Baron von Raschke, who's being interviewed, and he just is flabbergasted that this happened, which really helped the angle as well. And then Wally Carbo comes in and just, I haven't seen anything like this. This is just ridiculous. I wanted to suspend him for 6 months, but the high flyers are not having it. They want to get their revenge. So I need to talk with the commission. Blah blah. And then the weakest part I thought of this whole angle that they're setting up, the angle that's gonna lead to the money match is the next one. But this setup, Bruiser Brody is not only a bad dude, but an opportunist. He made sure that the high flyers were in a position where he could attack them and not have to be fighting 2-on-1. So he waited till Brunzell put the figure 4 on before he jumps out there and does the flying knee on him. And then he catches Gagne off guard while he's tied up with his manager. The only thing that I think hurt that whole setup is they cut to the high flyers standing there who are going to talk about their injuries because they both have to have surgery. And they both look like they just got off the golf course. Greg Gagne doesn't have a leg brace on. They don't pan down to show the leg brace. Jim Brunzell's like, yeah, he hit me in my stomach and I had to have a blood clot taken out from my groin. Well, actually, he landed on your chest twice with a knee drop. And I don't know how you got a blood clot in your groin from that. And he looked like he could go out and swim, play basketball, and then get in the ring and wrestle. He did not look injured at all. And Gagne didn't look any more injured. And Brunzell said, yeah, I think I got to be out 3 to 4 weeks. And Gagne said, yeah, I think I've got to be out 5 to 6 weeks after the knee surgery. They probably had little things that needed to be fixed. And this was an angle to get them off to where they could go get those things fixed, but at least look like you're injured. Put a knee brace on. Come out there with your stomach and your ribs and everything wrapped up. But just to be standing there talking like, yeah, we just got off the golf course, but we're both hurt real bad and we're going to have to go have surgery. That to me was the weak part of the angle. Then cut to a few weeks later, there is a big battle royal. And you have to give Vern Gagne credit in 84. He is trying to fight Vince. He's paying money to have Dusty Rhodes and Abdullah the Butcher come in for this battle royal and this big angle setup. So he's costing a little money. Now, the promotion for this battle royal was absolutely preposterous. Instead of saying it was a $10,000 battle royal or it was a $20,000 battle royal, $100,000 battle royal. Those are the kind of claims that if somebody just thinks about it a little bit, it pisses people off. You're talking $100,000 in 1984. It's probably at least $1 million today or more. So it's ridiculous. But they have this big battle royal, and the Sheik's army, Sheik Adnan al-Casey's army, consists of Brody, Abdullah the Butcher, and Sheik Jerry Blackwell, who for years had been Crusher Jerry Blackwell, and he was a St. Louis regular as well. So I was very familiar with Jerry Blackwell. And Jerry Blackwell was probably 5'11" to 6 foot tall and about 390 pounds. He was as round as he was tall. But he could move like he was a 200-pounder, could do drop kicks, and he was a strongman. Before he got into wrestling, he had been a strongman. All of those things served him well. Now, carrying way too much weight for way too long didn't serve him well in the long run because he died in his 40s, and it was health-related issues, from carrying too much weight for way too long. The bill always comes due, unfortunately. Blackwell was a believable force that could challenge Brody one-on-one. So that was the money match. Get a match or a series of matches is what they got between Brody and Blackwell. So to get there, though, we've got to split Blackwell off from the Sheik's army. So how they do it in this battle royal is towards the end of the battle royal, it was not as easy to do as it came off because Blackwell kind of came off a little heelish at first because he goes for a body splash, a running body tackle while Abdullah is holding one of the fabulous ones. I can't remember if it's Stan Lane or Steve Kern. And Blackwell runs right into the Butcher and kind of stuns him. And so then he starts fighting with the fabulous one. You know, it was an accident. Sorry about that. Well, the Butcher gets mad and comes over and starts punching Jerry Blackwell. Jerry Blackwell says, "What's going on?" He starts hitting him back. I think Abdullah hit him with something, and he kind of fell off to the side for a second. And then Abdullah turned to the fabulous one and threw the fabulous one over the top rope. But as Abdullah was throwing him over the top rope, Jerry Blackwell comes up behind Abdullah and dumps Abdullah over the top rope. Now, Abdullah's been body tackled and then eliminated by somebody who's supposed to be his partner. So, in a wrestling storyline, it makes sense if he's pissed off. Abdullah would actually kind of be the one who's more sympathetic in this spot. Sheik Adnan Al-Kaisi gets mad about it, sends Brody after Blackwell, and Blackwell dumps Brody after he had gone out on the floor and was fighting with Abdullah. Blackwell gets back in the ring and starts arguing with Sheik Adnan Al-Kaisi and hits Adnan Al-Kaisi. But by this time, Abdullah and Brody are back in the ring, and the numbers game is too much. And Adnan Al-Kaisi's got a cast on his forearm, which I think he wore for like 3 years. That was the slowest healing injury in history. Him and Mike Sharp and Cowboy Bob Orton, I think, had the longest forearm injuries that have ever been known to man. And he clubs Blackwell in the head about 5 or 6 times with the cast, tears the head covering that he had given Jerry Blackwell in half to signify that he's no longer a Sheik, he's no longer part of Adnan's army. They continue to beat him up. So the baby faces come back in to try to save Jerry Blackwell. Brody and Abdullah keep getting over there, kicking on Blackwell until the baby faces fight him out of the ring. And then one of the other, Abdullah will come back in, do the same thing, and they just keep doing that for like 5 or 10 minutes. Blackwell takes quite a pounding, which is what turned the fans towards him. You could tell at the beginning they didn't know who to root for or what to do. When the baby faces come out to save Blackwell, you could see the crowd start to turn a little bit. And it continued to go on. I'm surprised they didn't have a bit of a riot. The way Brody and the way Brody and the Butcher were beating on Blackwell, surprised it didn't lead to a riot, to be honest. Eventually, Blackwell gets back to his feet after they finally run Brody and them off, as Dusty is cheering Blackwell on to stand back up to his feet. So now the fans definitely know, oh, Jerry Blackwell is the babyface because Dusty's on his side. Blackwell no sooner gets to his feet than Brody comes back to ringside with a chair and wears him out with that chair from outside the ring. And eventually they get it cleared. I think that the police probably told them, okay, this is enough. The crowd's starting to get agitated because you could tell they were getting agitated. Brody and Abdullah and Sheik Adnan Al-Kaisi get out of there for good. And then Dusty and I think Kurt Hennig helped Blackwell back to the back. So now Blackwell is clearly the babyface. And it led to some profitable series for them while Brody was there. So it was a good angle, and it did help their business. Eventually, what happens to the AWA is the same thing that happened to everybody else that tried to go up against Vince. Vince just eventually got all their talent. He paid their talent more than they could pay him. He'd lure the talent away. And eventually, there was not enough talent to bring people in to watch Vern's cards anymore. But in 84, he was doing a little better. By 86, 87, Vern had lost the plot. He lasted a lot longer than a lot of the other promoters did. The promotion was not much to watch after 86 or so. So that's my review. I'll have all the links for all of the things we talked about. Other than Reacher, just go to, if you've got Amazon Prime, just go search for Reacher, and it should come up. It'd be 3 seasons. But everything else that we talked about, I'll have the links for in the show notes at kenzermanjr.com. Episode 90. I would say I've got about a fifth of the website back up. It's going to take probably a couple more months, but after the redesign, it'll be exactly the way I want it. So trying not to get too irritated about that and just look at it as an opportunity instead of an obstacle. Next week, I've got an idea of what I'm going to talk about, but it depends on if I can coordinate with Trey or Caleb. If I can't coordinate with them, then we'll get together at the end of the month and I'll have a solo episode next week. If you have anything that you would like me to talk about from 1870 to 1930, just drop me an email or reach out to me on Facebook. I'd love to have ideas of things that people want to hear about. Until next week, everybody, take care. Bye bye.